The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
You're watching The Checkpoint with Elena Kvanchilashvili and myself, I'm David Jalavonia.
Yes, Sunday, 10 p.m. sharp, and we're here to tell you more about business and economics. And straight on topic, to follow up on the report that we just shared with you in the headlines, here is our talk with the ADB Country Director, Shane Rosenthal.
ADB raised Georgia's economic growth forecast by 5 percentage points from 3.5% to 8.5%. What are the main drivers?
Well, this is a big increase. Domestic demand is really the main driver, but we've also seen external forces behind this. Exports are up significantly. Tourism revenues, $500 million already in the first 6 months of the year, and remittances are up something like 30%. So there are many different drivers, but it's definitely happening. And it appears to be quite significant. At the same time, we all know that inflation is quite serious. We're expecting 9.5% this year, and the impact on vulnerable groups, on normal consumers, is definitely there, and we can see it also in the unemployment and poverty figures, which are at about 22 and 21%.
One very interesting quote among many in this recent report, and let me read it out. Several hydrocarbon importers also enjoyed robust growth. Notably, Georgia's economy grew by 12.7% in the first half of 2021, with a recovery in all sectors, prompting upward revisions to its growth forecast from 3.5% to 8.5% for 2021 and from 6 to 6.5% for 2022. Mr. Rosenthal, in your opinion, what percentage of this growth was caused by the higher inflation, higher prices on the one hand, and on the other by the so-called base effect?
Yeah, these are ADB projections of real GDP growth, and keep in mind that we're coming back from a very low base from 2020, when the economy experienced a 6.2% contraction. So 8.5% this year might sound like a lot, but there is a lot of pent-up demand, and the realities of things like just mentioned, like strong tourism, and we can all see that in Tbilisi and outside Tbilisi this year. I think we're back to already about 50% of the 2019 revenues in tourism. And I already mentioned exports are strong and remittances are strong. But again, this is coming from a low base last year.
What are some of the main downside risks that you see to ADB's forecast?
You know, the main risk, I think, is a stalled vaccination rollout. We've got about a million people who have received at least one shot so far. And where I know that the goal of the government is to reach about 1.7 million, or 60%, by the end of the year. I think we can get there. I know that in the last month, we've seen quite an increase, I think up to 25,000 people getting vaccinated per day. But there is a slowdown now. That's also to be expected after many individuals sought their shots with the surge in the Delta variant in August and the earlier part of this month. But there's still a long way to go, and I think this is not something that's going to suddenly be over.
In this context, ADB just approved 50 million USD loan to help the government of Georgia to procure and deploy COVID-19 vaccines. But today, and you also mentioned that this process is stalled, and also we see this lack of strategic communication with the population, with those who still have doubts whether to be vaccinated or not. And we already started hearing from different people involved in this process, important people that there might be risks of these vaccines that we already have that are now in the fridge to be soon outdated. So what does this loan expect to reach?
Yeah, I'm really pleased about this loan, which ADB's board approved earlier today. It's for $15 million. It's going to finance procurement for vaccines to cover about 300,000 people. That's about 8% of the population or 11% of the adult population. Your question's a good one. Is there already enough supply? I think in the near term, the situation is not a matter of one which is constrained by supply of vaccines. The real concern is vaccine hesitancy. And that's why under this program that ADB is supporting, we are going to be financing efforts to step up the information campaign, make the public aware of the science, of the benefits of getting vaccinated. So that's a very important aspect for us and for other development partners. But again, this is not going to end suddenly. This pandemic is something that will continue, I think, into next year. But hopefully the effects will be much smaller because the number of people getting vaccinated is going to continue increasing. And I'm actually optimistic. I see these current numbers. I think we're at 35%, 36% of the population now. I think that we can get that up above 50% this fall and beyond. And we'll continue in the new year to reach levels where the economy, the economic confidence should increase, where the type of vaccination rates would be similar to some of the more successful countries around the world.
These questions are being raised because what we see as an unfortunate trend in Georgia is that the trend and the number of people vaccinated with the first jab is decreasing, and that's the trend that we are looking. That is talking about the vaccine hesitancy that you also mentioned. Probably you're getting this question very often right now, but when ADB started working with the Georgian government on this loan, because in the context of 70 million euro loan refusal, this is a question.
Yeah, first on our partnership with the government around the pandemic response and the vaccines in particular. I talked earlier about the $300 million of support that ADB provided last year to help weather the worst of the lockdown, the impact on households and businesses. By the end of last year, we were already working with the government on the national vaccination deployment plan, and we've done that also in partnership with some other development partners. But we took the lead in that process, and we're very pleased with the result. Of course, it will be updated from time to time, and that work is ongoing now. But I think your second question is in regard to the government's approach to taking loans this year.
In the context of Georgian Dream's refusal of 75 million tranche from the EU with the motive that the government did not need any additional loans, and this was a conditioned loan, and you know that the main reform that was on the table, it was the justice reform that we have also talked about its importance and several times. So my question is, your comment on this context, and also probably your approach to the reform agenda of Georgia as well, because you are involved yourself, ADB, supporting, for example, ESO through helping Georgian Railway.
Georgia has a strong reputation as a reformer. And over the past 2 years, ADB's engagement here has increasingly focused on support for the types of structural reforms that you just mentioned. And the loan that was approved earlier this week for the electricity transmission company reforms of GSE. This started more than 2 years ago, and in fact, the loan was negotiated with the government a year ago, in July, actually more than a year ago, July of last year. So these are not sudden decisions that either we or the government undertake. This is the result of a lot of hard work, of commitment over time to these reforms of state-owned enterprises. And this one in particular of GSE is a flagship. It's a model. It's something that the Ministry of Economy can be very proud of that the government can use as a model to point to for some of the other very important SOEs. You mentioned Georgian Railways. ADB is already working with the UWSCG, that's the state-owned water utility. And we're in discussions with MEPA about the Georgian amelioration. And that's what our focus is on. And the reason is that these institutions, their accountability, their transparency, their ability to act efficiently is really the core constraint going forward. It's not a problem of money, of having enough financing. It's about the institutions that are using that money and fixing them and making sure that they are world class.
You mentioned that coming back to the 15 million USD loan, you mentioned that this project builds on ADB's earlier support for Georgia's COVID-19 response, including 200 million USD policy-based loan to strengthen Georgia's social protection, fiscal and debt management systems. What has Georgia achieved in this direction?
Georgia has, I think, was actually a model for a quick response last year, and ADB was simply a partner that helped them with a lot of these actions that they took. And some examples, which you may be familiar with, include an expansion of the pension scheme, increasing, I think it was by 30 lari, the amount received for those 70 years old and above. And by the way, 65% of that group were women, so this had a very strong gender impact. And also the programs that supported SMEs or the program to ensure that households didn't suffer under their utility bills, so to help pay utility bills at the height of the lockdown. So these are just some examples, but it also helped the Ministry of Finance with some actions that it was already taking and wanted to continue with to make to protect the fiscal and debt management systems. Also, that focused on things like liabilities that some of the state-owned enterprises have and systems for assessing those and handling those. Same for fiscal liabilities associated with public-private partnerships. So all of this is going on, and it's very, very important.
Today, IMF says, and probably you have read that big 84-page document as well, that Georgia has a little fiscal space to cut expenses. Do you think cutting on infrastructure, on capital expenses, so to say, is the right decision? Because ADB's support to Georgia is also heavily directed to that direction.
Capital expenditure is the easier area to be more selective. And that doesn't necessarily mean cuts. It can mean delaying programs. It can mean and should mean being more selective when the government looks at which capital projects to plan for which time period. And we've already seen some of that with some capital expenditure programs being delayed, and we support that. We have to be very careful in ensuring that the scarce resources that the government has are very well used for programs that provide benefits, that are true and sustainable investments in the future.
So for the future growth, economic growth that we all need desperately need for the post-pandemic period, you think that, for example, social expenditures would bring a bigger benefit to the economy rather than capital projects?
I think there are three pillars, if you like, that should underpin that future thinking about how to spend resources. One is what we just talked about, ensuring that we're not just looking at how much we're spending, but we're looking carefully at how we're spending it. So that means reforming and strengthening the institutions. And so the focus on SOE reform is really central to that. The second is to be very selective in choosing the projects that you spend that money on. This is actually investment, not expenditure, it's investment. And so there should be a return. And third, this is exactly the right point that you make, Eleni. This is time to invest in human capital, and that's why ADB approved a vocational skills program last year, and we're already working on a new general education program in the years ahead. Health sector is also very important. I think that the pandemic has put a spotlight on the health services in this country, and there is definitely an agenda there to ensure that expenditure, not just the government's expenditure, citizens' expenditure, is efficient and provides value for money.
What is ADB's main recommendation today to sustain the economic recovery it has started?
Human capital, the structural reforms, the selectivity in expenditure. I think these are sort of three pillars that we look to in our partnership with government.
Yes, but before that, probably still the pace of vaccination, so that we get to the point when we are thinking about this long-term development. And thank you for helping Georgia in that. And thank you for this interview as well.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.